Hey there! Welcome back to another peaceful evening together. Tonight's story begins outside a quiet cafe, where the smell of baked bread and roasted coffee blends with the sound of a bicycle bell from long ago. Helen is older now, wiser, calmer. She walks a little slower, thinks a little deeper, and smiles at things most people don't even notice. Like a red bicycle leaning against a cafe wall. To most, it's just a bike. Bright paint, a bent reflector, nothing special. But for Helen, it's a time machine. It's year 1959 again. She's barefoot in a summer dress, laughing through scraped knees and warm breezes. Paul is there, with that crooked grin, and he's telling her to let go of the fence. "Just trust the pedals," he said. "They'll catch you." He taught her how to ride. But more than that, he taught her how to fall and how to laugh afterward. He taught her that some things are worth doing even if you're scared. That a wobble doesn't mean you failed. It just means you're moving. Helen hadn't thought of that summer in years. Not until today. Not until the red bicycle brought it all back. The feel of warm handlebars in her palms, the smell of Paul's sun-worn shirt, the freedom of coasting downhill with her eyes closed, just for a second. Some memories wait quietly, and some roll right up beside you and ring the bell. Before we begin, if these quiet stories bring you a little warmth, feel free to like the video and subscribe. And in the comments, tell me what's something from your past that still finds you when you're not looking. Now, take a deep breath. Let the hum of memory and the rhythm of gentle wheels ease you into rest. This is a story about riding through joy, through fear, through time, and never forgetting how to begin again. The cafe was tucked between a flower shop and a bookstore. Its sign hung crookedly, the paint chipped, but proud. Helen passed it often on her Sunday walks. Sometimes she stopped in for tea. Other times, just for the smell of fresh bread, cinnamon, a trace of vanilla that always reminded her of her mother's apron. But today, she stopped for something else. It was leaning there, the bicycle, not brand new, but bright. Red like cherry candy. A basket strapped to the front, a bell on the handlebar, a single white ribbon dangling from the grip. It shouldn't have made her stop, but it did. Helen stood there, her hand on the window, watching the sun reflect off the metal frame. She didn't move, didn't breathe. For a second, she wasn't outside a cafe in the present. She was 12 again, then 15, then 17. 100 versions of herself flickered behind her eyes, all of them riding that same red bicycle, or almost the same. Her fingers twitched slightly, as if remembering the grip. Her knees ached faintly, as if recalling a fall. Her lips curled into a smile she hadn't worn in decades. Inside the cafe, someone was laughing. Not loud, but light. It made her chest hurt not with pain, but with remembering. She pulled out a chair from the outdoor patio and sat down, her purse still hanging from her shoulder. She didn't order anything, just sat and stared and listened to the echo of years she didn't realize she still carried. She thought about Paul. He'd found the bike. That's what she remembered first. Said he'd traded 3 comic books and a pocket knife for it. It had a dent in the back fender and 1 pedal that squeaked. But it was red. And it was freedom. And it was theirs. He rode it first, coasting in circles, while she clapped and called him a show-off. Then one day, he stopped and said, "Now it's your turn." She had laughed, shaking her head. No way. I'll fall. You will, he said. But then you'll get up. That's the deal. It had seemed so simple then. Life was made of scraped knees and shared sodas, of promises scribbled in notebook margins, and the thrill of doing something for the first time. That red bicycle had taken them everywhere. Down to the lake, where the frogs croaked loudly at dusk. Up the hill behind the school, where the grass grew wild and tall. Past the hardware store, past the post office, past the slow-moving creek that never asked where they were going. And now, here she was, 70 years later, frozen in time, because a bicycle leaned against a cafe wall. She closed her eyes and let the wind pass through her hair like it used to, like it hadn't in years. She could hear the click of gears, the soft chime of the bell, and the sound of her laughter echoing down an old gravel road. And just like that, she was there again. The summer of year 1959 arrived like a song, bright and slow and full of pauses you could fall into. The kind of summer that made time feel like it was stretching just for you. Helen was 17, quiet, thoughtful. She liked puzzles and pressed flowers between the pages of mystery novels. Her father worked at the post office. Her mother made the best corn muffins in town. And Helen, most afternoons, sat under the elm tree in their front yard, with her knees pulled up and a book balanced in her lap. That's where Paul found her. He didn't knock, didn't call out, just leaned his new prize, the red bicycle, against their fence and climbed up to sit beside her, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "What you reading?" he asked. She looked up, slightly annoyed. "A mystery." He grinned. "Do I look suspicious?" "Yes," she said flatly, then cracked a smile. He had moved to town only that spring. The rumor was that his uncle owned a barn full of old cars. Paul helped him fix them. He wore oil-stained shirts and smelled like motor grease and sunshine. And he smiled, like he already knew your secret. They had gone to school together that year, but barely spoke. Now, school was out. The air was warm, and time belonged to the daring. "I got a bike," he said, nudging his head toward the red frame glinting in the sun. Helen glanced at it. "I can see that. Want to ride it?" "I don't know how." He raised an eyebrow. "Then it's your lucky day." She laughed. "You're impossible." "Maybe. But I'm also free all summer." And that's how it began. They started slowly, first just walking the bike up and down the sidewalk. Then Paul showed her how to hold the handlebars, how to balance without pedaling, and how to push off. The first time she actually rode, it was for about 5 seconds. Long enough to make her gasp, short enough to make her tumble. Paul ran to her, wide-eyed. "You okay?" She laughed, sitting up, brushing off grass. That was amazing. The next day, she rode 10 seconds, then 20. By the end of the week, they were riding side by side, he slowing down so she could keep up. They rode to the library, to the soda fountain, to the park where fireflies danced just before dusk. He showed her how to ride with no hands. She showed him how to close his eyes and still know the way home. When it rained, they sat on her porch with lemonade and crossword puzzles, legs stretched out and their shoes drying beside them. And when it didn't rain, they raced down hills with their feet in the air and the wind stealing their breath. They never called it love. They didn't need to. It was in the way he waited at every corner, in the way she watched his face more than the road, in the way silence felt like a song when they shared it. That summer, the world grew softer, edges rounded, time loosened. and the red bicycle was always there like a heartbeat between them. Helen had never liked trying new things. She liked books with neat endings, safe recipes, quiet routines. She liked watching birds from her window and knowing exactly when the postman would arrive. But riding a bicycle? That was something wild, something loud and fast and full of chances to fall. Still, each morning that summer, she laced up her shoes, stepped out the door, and found Paul waiting with a red bike. "Ready?" he'd ask. "No," she'd reply. And then she'd climb on anyway. The sidewalk became her classroom. The creaky fence, her support. Paul's voice, her instruction. Don't look down. Trust the balance. Loosen your grip. The bike wants to move. Let it wobble. That's how you learn. She wobbled a lot. She scraped her knees, bruised her elbow. Once, she rode straight into a mailbox and landed in someone's rosebush. Paul didn't laugh. Not then. He pulled her up and brushed the petals from her hair. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, cheeks red. "I forgot to steer. You'll remember next time." And she did. Eventually, the fence was unnecessary. The falls became fewer. The pedaling is steadier. The laughter grew louder. She started to love the wind in her hair, the click of the chain, the way her shadow danced ahead of her like it had somewhere to be. She felt taller, braver, lighter. She felt proud. And Paul watched it, all the quiet girl who once clung to the handlebars, now flying down the sidewalk with her arms stretched wide. They turned riding into a ritual. Each afternoon, Paul would knock on her window. She'd grab her book, always pretending she'd only just finished a chapter, and they'd take the red bicycle out into the sun. They switched off riding. One pedaled, one ran beside. Then halfway through the afternoon, they'd switch again. It wasn't about getting anywhere. It was about the rhythm, the soft sound of wheels on pavement. The wind caught her hair just right. His laugh cut through the late summer haze. Sometimes, they didn't speak for long stretches, just pedaled, listened, breathed. Other times, they talked about everything. What you wanted to do after school, what he'd build if he had his own tools, their favorite colors. The exact moment they realized adults didn't always have the answers. One day, they sat by the riverbank with the bike propped between them and watched the dragonflies skim the water. Paul looked over and asked, "When do you feel most like yourself?" Helen thought for a moment. "Right after a fall, when I'm still laughing." He grinned. "That's my favorite part too." They talked about fears of deep water, his of speaking in front of crowds. They talked about dreams, hers, of writing stories, his of owning a shop with wooden signs and shiny knobs. The bicycle listened to it all. And even though it was just one summer, each ride carved something deeper into Helen's memory, a groove that time would never quite smooth out. Not all of Helen's falls were physical. Some were clumsy words, nervous silences, unsure glances, little stumbles of the heart. But with Paul, even her missteps felt safe. They had a way of laughing together that turned mistakes into stories. Wobbling off the sidewalk? That became the Great Curb Escape. Getting stuck in the mud near the mill? Operation Rescue Wheel. Every tumble was named, remembered, and shared. One evening, as the sun sank low, Helen took a sharp turn too fast. The front tire caught on a rock. and the bike twisted out from under her. She landed hard, her palms scraping against the gravel. Paul rushed to her side. She was quiet at first, holding her breath. Tears welled in her eyes, not just from pain but from embarrassment. She hated crying, hated looking weak. Then Paul sat beside her on the ground and held out his own hand. A fresh scrape ran across his knuckles. "When did you fall?" she asked, confused. "Just now," he said. "I figured it'd be rude to let you do it alone." And that was all it took. She laughed, loud and long, and through her tears. He joined in, both of them sitting there like two fools under a purple sky. That night, Helen noticed something new, how Paul looked at her when she wasn't speaking. Patient, gentle, like she was a story he'd read many times, but still loved to hear. They talked as the stars came out, about being scared to try things, about how falling wasn't the end, about how you could fall with someone and still stand up smiling. It became the theme of their summer. They stumbled through new jokes, awkward silences, moments where their fingers almost touched but didn't. And each time they laughed, something in Helen's chest lightened. One afternoon, she brought an old blanket, and they laid it out near the creek. The bike leaned against a tree. Paul found a crooked radio station, and they listened to fuzzy music, making up lyrics when the words cut out. She reached for his hand without thinking. He held it like it was something fragile, like it meant something more than just skin on skin. They didn't talk about it. They didn't need to. That summer, the red bicycle carried them not just over sidewalks and streets, but into something quieter, something lasting. The world kept spinning, but Helen felt steady. And every laugh, every wobble, every shared fall whispered the same thing. "You're not alone." It was Paul's idea. "There's a lake about 6 miles out," he said one morning. "I used to fish there with my uncle. Want to see it?" Helen hesitated. 6 miles sounded far, but he was already grinning, holding the handlebars, the red bicycle between them like an open door. So she nodded. They packed a small bag peanut butter sandwiches, 2 glass bottles of soda, a small towel, and her mother's peach cookies wrapped in a red napkin. Helen rode first. Paul jogged beside her for a while, then hopped onto the back pegs when the road stretched smooth. They took turns, switching off, coasting and pedaling, laughing when the road tilted or the tires hit gravel. The town gave way to fields, rows of corn taller than their heads, wildflowers dancing in the breeze. A hawk is circling overhead like a slow kite. No cars, no clocks, just the hum of wheels and the rhythm of their breath. When the lake finally came into view, it looked like something out of a postcard, water still as glass, trees hugging the shoreline, dragonflies darting through golden light. Helen whispered, "It's beautiful." Paul said nothing, just took her hand and led her to the edge. They laid the blanket near the water and kicked off their shoes. The ground was warm, soft, with patches of moss. The lake shimmered as if holding the sunlight in its palms. Helen dipped her toes in. "It's cold," she said, laughing. Paul stepped in with both feet. "Then come feel brave." She did, inch by inch, until they stood ankle deep, watching their reflections ripple and reform. They ate slowly, talking about everything and nothing. What they'd do if they had a boat. How long would it take to swim to the other side? What clouds look like from underwater? Paul asked. "Do you ever think about time? Like how this might be the only day we ever come here? Helen looked at him. Then let's make it count. And they did. They skipped stones. She got 3 skips, then 5. He claimed he saw one go 7, but she said he was lying, and he admitted maybe it was only 4. When the sun started to dip, she lay back on the blanket, eyes half closed. It feels like everything's quiet, she whispered. Paul nodded. Like the world's holding its breath, just for us. They didn't kiss. Not that day. But something passed between them. Something gentle and deep and wordless. A kind of promise made not by speaking, but by being. On the ride back, Helen sat on the bike, and Paul walked beside her, his hand on the seat to keep her steady. Let's come back, she said softly. He didn't answer right away, but after a long pause, he said, always. And even though life had a way of breaking promises, for that one summer evening, she believed him. Summer doesn't end all at once. It fades like the way sunlight dims through a dusty window, or how laughter lingers after a door closes. That August, the air grew cooler. The cicadas sang slower. The trees, still green, began to whisper a different tone. Helen felt it in the way Paul's footsteps crunched more on the morning sidewalk. Something was shifting. They didn't talk about it. Not when they rode to the park. Not when they lay in the grass sharing crackers and stories. Not even when Helen noticed Paul staring at the sky longer than usual. One evening, the red bicycle leaned against her fence, just like always. But Paul wasn't smiling. I leave next week, he said quietly. She blinked. Where? My dad got a job out of state. We're moving. Quick. End of summer. Helen didn't say anything for a long time. Paul rubbed the back of his neck, eyes lowered. I didn't want to tell you until I had to. She nodded. Not out of understanding, but because she didn't trust her voice to work. Let's go for one more ride, he said. And so, they did. They didn't plan where to go. They just pedaled. Past the post office. Past the school. Past the old oak tree where she'd once dropped her book and he'd picked it up with a mock bow. Their hands brushed once. He didn't pull away. At the edge of town, where the fields started, they stopped. The sun was sinking low, turning the sky a quiet orange. Helen got off the bike and stood there, arms crossed. What do you think it'll be like? She asked. He shrugged. Loud, new, strange. Are you scared? A little, he said. Mostly about forgetting stuff. Like what? He looked at her then, his eyes full. This. She swallowed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, the little bell from the red bicycle. I want you to have this, he said. So, you'll remember the sound. She took it with both hands, cradled it like a secret. He didn't try to hug her, didn't try to kiss her. They just stood together, looking at the bike one last time. Then Paul climbed on and pedaled away, his silhouette shrinking as the sky darkened behind him. Helen stayed until she couldn't see him anymore. And then she walked the red bicycle home, alone. The coffee in her cup had gone cold. Helen hadn't touched it. She'd just sat there, one hand still resting on her lap, the other lightly tracing the edge of the table. The red bicycle was still there, still bright, still leaning. But her heart wasn't aching. Not quite. It was full, not with sadness, but with presence. She smiled softly to herself, closed her eyes. Listen to the street around her shoes on pavement, a bell ringing from inside the cafe, laughter spilling out from someone's conversation. She wondered if that girl on the red bike knew how much she'd remember this someday, or that a single summer could live in your bones for the rest of your life. She glanced at her purse and reached inside, carefully pulling out a small item wrapped in tissue. The bell. The same one Paul had given her all those years ago. She hadn't brought it here on purpose. She always carried it tucked in the corner of her bag, like a charm. She placed it gently on the table and smiled. The red bicycle reminded her of him. Yes, but more than that, it reminded her of herself, of who she'd been, of who she still was, quietly, brave in small ways, strong in silence, and every so often, still riding if only in memory. She stood slowly and left a few coins under her untouched cup. As she turned to leave, the cafe door opened and a young girl stepped out. She was maybe 16, maybe 17. Light in her step, a backpack slung over one shoulder. She paused, looked at the bicycle, and then at Helen. "Pretty, isn't it?" the girl said, nodding toward the bike. Helen smiled. "Very." The girl lingered. "I've been thinking of learning, but I always feel silly, like I should have already known." Helen looked. The way she shifted her weight, the hope in her voice, the nerves behind her smile. And so, she reached into her bag, picked up the bell, and held it out. "This might help," she said. The girl blinked. "I can't take that. It's already yours," Helen replied. And with that, she walked away slowly, steadily, peacefully. Behind her, she heard the soft ring of the bell, and just like that, the story had begun again. So, if you ever see a red bicycle, old or new, pause for a moment. Let it remind you that memories don't fade. They ride beside us, quiet and steady, waiting for us to notice them again. Maybe it's not about holding on. Maybe it's about passing something forward, a laugh, a lesson, a bell that once meant everything. And maybe, just maybe, the best stories never end. They just begin again with someone else. If this story brought you a moment of warmth or reflection, I'd love for you to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And in the comments, tell me what small thing do you carry, not for its worth, but for the memory it holds. Until next time, sleep well, and may your dreams take you gently to where your heart remembers.